I couldn't count them. The faces kept appearing beneath the water until they covered nearly the entire lake. Some looked no older than toddlers. Others might have been 10 or 11, boys, girls, different faces, different ages. Yet every one of them shared the same terrible stillness. Their pale skin seemed almost luminous beneath the black water, while long strands of hair drifted around them like weeds caught in a slow current. None of them blinked. None of them breathed. They simply looked up at me through the surface, smiling. Not the joyful smile of a children at play. It was a smile that never reached the eyes. A smile held too long, too perfectly. The lantern in my hand trembled. I told myself to step back. Instead, I found myself taking one slow step closer to the shoreline. The water remained perfectly calm. No ripples, no flashes, no splashes. Those impossible faces floated only inches beneath the surface, as though they were waiting for something. Waiting for me. A tiny voice drifted across the lake. So lonely. Another answered from somewhere else beneath the water. Come play. Then another. You'll stay forever. The voices overlapped until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Some sounded like little girls, others like young boys, all of them soft, gentle, almost comforting. I tightened my grip on the rifle until my knuckles turned white. This isn't real. The words came out louder than I intended. My own voice echoed across the lake. The children stopped smiling. Every face turned upward at exactly the same moment, not toward me, toward the sound, toward my voice. The silence that followed felt heavier than the mountain itself. Then every mouth opened. No laughter came out, only a low humming. It wasn't a song, it wasn't a cry. It was somewhere between the two, a thin, wavering sound that vibrated through the air and settled deep inside my chest. The lake began to ripple, not from wind, from beneath. The faces slowly descended into darkness, one after another, until the surface became an ordinary mirror once again. Without another thought, I turned and ran. Branches clawed at my coat as I forced my way back through the trees. The lantern swung wildly, throwing frantic shadows across the forest. I no longer cared about following the trail. I only wanted distance. Every instinct screamed that something had followed me out of the lake. Behind me, I heard footsteps, tiny feet, many of them, running through the woods, never catching up, never falling behind, always just beyond the reach of the lantern's light. I refused to look back. People have asked me over the years why I didn't turn around. The answer is simple. Because I already knew if I looked, I would see them. And once you truly see something impossible, you can never convince yourself it wasn't there. I burst from the trees and stumbled into the cemetery, breathing so hard my chest burned. The moon hung high over Blackwater Hollow now, bathing the graves in silver light. The flowers I had seen earlier still rested atop the children's graves. Fresh, bright, completely out of place among the weathered stones. Then I noticed movement. Someone was kneeling beside one of the graves, a woman. She wore a dark gray shawl over a faded dress that might once have been black. Her hair, streaked with silver, hung loosely down her back. She was carefully arranging fresh lilies on the grave of a little girl. For several seconds I simply stared. A living person. Finally, relief washed over me. Ma'am, she didn't react. I approached cautiously. Ma'am, I didn't know anyone still lived here. She continued placing flowers as though she hadn't heard me. I stopped a few feet away. Excuse me? Very slowly, she stood, When she turned toward me, I realized she wasn't as old as I at first thought. Perhaps 40, maybe younger. Grief had simply aged her face beyond its years. Her eyes settled on me with quiet sadness. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was calm, not frightened, not surprised, as though she'd been expecting another stranger sooner or later. "I'm a government surveyor." "I know." "You know? They always send someone eventually." She glanced toward the trees leading to the lake. "They never listen." A chill ran through me. "You know about whatever's those in those woods?" She looked at me for a long moment. "You've already seen them." It wasn't a question. I nodded. I thought I was imagining things. "No." Her answer came instantly. "I wish you were." She bent to straighten one of the flowers. "They've shown themselves to you." "What are they?" I asked. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. "I don't know what they are now." She looked down at the little grave. "But I know what they used to be." The wind stirred gently through the cemetery. "My daughter is buried here." She touched the weathered stone with remarkable tenderness. "At least I buried what they found." I waited. My husband worked the silver mine. Spring of 1871 was unusually warm. Snow melted early. The streams overflowed. Children spent every afternoon playing near the lake because the adults were busy keeping the mine from flooding. She swallowed. Then the first child disappeared. I thought of the dozens of small graves surrounding us. They blamed wolves. She shook her head. Then bears. Another slow shake. Then kidnappers. She finally looked at me. "But children don't simply vanish without leaving tracks." I remembered the tiny hands beneath my window, the wet ground, the missing footprints. They searched for weeks. Her voice became distant, as though she were speaking to herself. "They dragged the lake." "Did they find them?" "They found some." The way she emphasized "some" made my stomach tighten. "The others?" She closed her eyes. "Came home." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They knocked on their own front doors after sunset." My mouth went dry. The parents opened the doors because they thought their children had survived. She wrapped the shawl tighter around herself. The children smiled. A long silence followed. They asked if they could come inside. The cemetery suddenly felt colder. What happened? No one who invited them in was ever seen again. The words settled over us like fresh snow. I wanted to dismiss them, to argue, to insist there had to be another explanation, but I'd already seen too much. The woman continued. "After that, the town stopped answering knocks after dark, and the disappearances, they became worse." She looked toward the forest again. "They stopped pretending to be lost." A branch cracked somewhere beyond the cemetery. Both of us turned instinctively. Nothing stood there. Only darkness between the pines. The woman lowered her voice. "They aren't evil the way wolves are evil." I stared at her. "They are lonely." Those words unsettled me more than anything else she'd said. Lonely? They don't understand death. A tear slid silently down her cheek. "They only remember playing." She wiped it away before it reached her chin. "They think everyone belongs with them." The wind shifted from somewhere deep in the forest. Children began laughing again. This time, the woman didn't even flinch. "They know you're here." "You've heard them before?" "I hear them every night." She smiled sadly. "They still call my daughter's name." I hesitated before asking the question that had haunted me since entering the valley. Why didn't you leave? Her answer came so softly I almost missed it. Because mothers don't abandon their children. She looked toward the lake one last time, even after death. Before I could speak again, the church bell rang once, a deep, lonely sound that echoed across the empty valley. The woman's expression changed instantly. All the warmth vanished from her face. They've woken. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. We have to get inside. The second bell rang, then the third. Somewhere across Blackwater Hollow, a child's voice whispered through the darkness, "Mother." Then another answered, "We're coming home." The woman's grip tightened around my wrist. "Don't speak." Her voice had become little more than a breath. "And whatever happens, do not answer the door." Another bell echoed through Blackwater Hollow. The sound rolled between the mountains before fading into the trees. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Something about it felt less like a warning and more like an invitation. The woman hurried through the cemetery with surprising speed, leading me toward a weather-beaten cabin tucked against the edge of the forest. Ivy had climbed halfway across its walls, and one side of the roof sagged beneath years of heavy snow. But unlike the rest of the buildings in town, this one showed unmistakable signs of life. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Fresh firewood had been stacked neatly beside the porch. The front steps had been swept clean. Someone had cared for this place. She pulled me inside and slammed the door. Heavy iron bolts slid into place one after another. Then she dragged a thick oak beam across the brackets behind the door. Only after every lock was secured did she allow herself to breathe. The cabin smelled of cedar, dried herbs, and wood smoke. A fire burned low inside a stone fireplace. Oil lamps cast warm pools of light across handmade furniture polished smooth by decades of use. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. Then I noticed the windows. Every one of them had been covered from the inside with thick wooden shutters. Not because of winter, because whoever lived here wanted to ensure that nothing outside could look in. The woman caught me staring. I closed them before sunset. Every night. She moved from window to window, checking each latch with practiced hands. I made the mistake of forgetting once. She didn't elaborate. Something in her face told me she never would. Only when she was satisfied did she remove the shawl from her shoulders. "My name is Eleanor." I introduced myself. She nodded absently, as though names had become unimportant long ago. "You've been here all these years?" 20. The answer stunned me. "Alone?" A faint, tired smile across her face. "No." She glanced toward the ceiling. They were always nearby. The woods settled heavily between us. I set my rifle against the wall but kept it within arm's reach. "Eleanor, I need to understand what's happening." She stared into the fire for a long time before speaking. When the mine opened, everyone believed Blackwater Hollow had been blessed. She placed another log onto the flames. Silver was everywhere. Families arrived from every direction. New houses were built every month. The fire popped loudly. Children filled the streets. She smiled at the memory. You could hear them laughing from sunrise until supper. Her smile disappeared. Then they found the spring. I remembered the one Elijah had warned me not to drink from. The spring in the mountains. She nodded. "It feeds the lake." "What about it?" "The water never froze, even in winter, especially in winter." She looked at me. People said it was a miracle. The room grew quiet except for the crackling fire. They began drawing drinking water from it because it tasted cleaner than the wells. I thought of Elijah's grandson, the laughter, the disappearance. What happened? The children changed first. My pulse quickened. How? They stopped sleeping. She folded her hands together. They'd wake before dawn and wander outside. Sleepwalking? That's what everyone believed. She shook her head slowly, but sleepwalkers eventually wake up. Her eyes met mine. These children never remembered leaving. The firelight reflected in her tired eyes. They only remembered dreams. What kind of dreams? She hesitated. Children playing in the water. Outside, the wind rose gently, the cabin walls creaked. They all described the same thing. Eleanor continued. They dreamed of boys and girls they'd never met. They had names. Sometimes. What did they want? Her answer came quietly. Friends. A cold sensation spread through my chest. The dreams became stronger every night. She reached beneath the table and removed a faded leather journal. The cover had been repaired so many times it barely held together. My husband began writing everything down after our daughter started talking in her sleep. She handed it to me. The pages had yellowed with age. Most entries described ordinary mining life, weather, ore production, supply shipments. Then, the handwriting changed. The lines became hurried, uneven, almost frantic. Sarah says the children are waiting beneath the water. Another entry. She insists they laugh without moving their mouths. A later page. She asked why we refused to let them inside. The entries continued for weeks, each darker than the last. 3 more children disappeared today. Nobody saw them leave. Dogs refused to go near the lake. The preacher says it is the work of Satan. The old Ute man says the water remembers every child it takes. I stopped reading. The Ute? Eleanor nodded. There was an old hunter who visited the settlement each autumn. He knew about the lake. He begged us to leave. What did he say? She closed her eyes, recalling words she had clearly repeated 1,000 times. He said the lake was older than the mountains. She gave a sad smile. I don't know whether that was true, but he said people make the mistake of believing water forgets. The fire cracked again. He told us, she swallowed, that some waters keep everything they're given. Silence settled over the room. Then 3 slow knocks echoed against the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Neither of us moved. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain whoever stood outside could hear it. Another pause. Then a little girl's voice. Mama? Eleanor's face became as pale as snow. The voice was impossibly sweet. I came home. No footsteps had approached the cabin. No branches had snapped. The child had simply been there. I instinctively started toward the door. Eleanor caught my sleeve with surprising force. No. But what if it isn't? The voice came again, softer now. Please. A tiny sob. I'm cold. Every instinct inside me rebelled. It sounded exactly like a frightened child. Exactly. I fell in the water. Another knock. Gentle, polite. Please let me in. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she never looked toward the door. Instead, she stared into the fire, her lips moving silently in prayer. Outside, the child began humming a simple lullaby, one every frontier mother knows. One I remembered hearing years earlier in another state, sung to restless children before bedtime. The melody drifted through the cracks in the cabin walls, beautiful, soft, heartbreaking. Then another child joined in, then another. Soon, dozens of young voices surrounded the cabin, all humming the same lullaby in perfect harmony. The sound came from every direction: the roof, the porch, beneath the floorboards, outside every window. It was impossible. There couldn't be that many children, not here, not after everything Eleanor had told me. The humming stopped all at once. Silence. Then a tiny laugh, not outside, inside the cabin, directly above us. I looked toward the ceiling, the attic. Something moved overhead, a slow scrape, then another, like wet little hands dragging across old wooden boards. Eleanor closed her eyes. They found us sooner tonight. The scraping continued. Tiny footsteps crossed the ceiling, back and forth, never hurrying, as though curious children were searching for the best place to climb down. Dust drifted from the beams overhead. One small clump landed on the table between us, then another. A single drop of water struck the center of the table. I stared at it. The ceiling above us was dry. Another drop fell, then another. Within seconds, water dripped steadily from the attic. Not rainwater, it was too clear, too cold. One drop landed on the open journal. The ink immediately spread, blurring into dark stains. Slowly, words began appearing on the damp page, not from hidden ink, not from trickery. The fresh water itself seemed to reveal them. I leaned closer. The handwriting wasn't Eleanor's husband's. It was smaller, childlike, shaky. Only 4 words emerged before the page dissolved into black ink. We found your house. Neither of us spoke. The words on the journal slowly bled into black stains until they became unreadable again, as though they had never existed. Only the drops of water remained. Drip, drip, drip. Each one struck the wooden table with unnatural precision. I looked up. The ceiling beams were old, but they were dry. No rain had fallen in days. There was no pipe to leak, no melting snow overhead. Yet icy water continued falling from empty air. Then the footsteps above us stopped. Silence, complete. Eleanor slowly stood from her chair. They're listening. Her voice barely carried across the room. They always stop when someone says too much. I frowned. You mean they understand us? She nodded once. They understand everything. A chill spread through me. They've been listening since we came inside. She gave no answer. She didn't need to. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller. Every shadow seemed to hide another pair of unseen eyes. Another drop struck the floor. Then, nothing. The water stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Outside, the wind returned, brushing softly against the walls. The humming was gone. The knocking had ceased. Only the fire continued crackling in the hearth. Eleanor waited several minutes before speaking again. They left. How can you be sure? They never stay long. She looked toward the shuttered windows. They don't have to. I picked up the journal carefully. The page where the message had appeared had become brittle, as though decades rather than moments had passed. When I turned it over, something slipped from between the pages. A folded piece of paper, yellow with age. It had been hidden inside the binding. Eleanor frowned. I've never seen that before. I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter, it was a map. Hand-drawn in faded ink. Blackwater Hollow occupied the center. The church, the schoolhouse, the cemetery, the mine. But one detail hadn't appeared on my government survey. A tunnel drawn beneath the town, running from the abandoned silver mine straight toward the lake. Someone had circled the tunnel repeatedly until the paper nearly tore. Beside it, one sentence had been written in hurried script. They don't come from the water. Below that, another line. The water only brings them home. I looked at Eleanor. Did your husband make this? She studied the handwriting. No. Then who? Her expression slowly darkened. The foreman. The mine foreman? He disappeared 3 days before the town was abandoned. She reached for the map. He spent weeks underground after the children started vanishing, looking for them. He said he heard voices beneath the mountain. She handed it back. Everyone thought the grief had broken his mind. I stared at the tunnel. If it was real, everything I believed about the lake might be wrong. The children weren't simply appearing from the water. The water connected to something else, somewhere else. I need to see that tunnel. Eleanor's eyes widened. No. If there's evidence, there is. She stepped closer. You've already seen it. I need facts. You need to survive until morning. The fire popped loudly between us. We don't know what's under that mountain. We won't unless I look. She stared at me for a long time. Finally, she sighed. Then I'll show you. The answer surprised me. I thought you'd refuse. I should. She wrapped the gray shawl around her shoulders again. But if you go alone, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Half an hour later, we stepped into the freezing night. The valley felt different now, not louder, not quieter, watchful. The moon rode high above the mountains, bathing the abandoned town in pale silver. Every building cast long black shadows across the empty streets. No laughter greeted us, no voices called from the darkness. That silence worried Eleanor for far more than the noises had. They're hiding. We crossed the town carefully. My lantern illuminated fresh, wet footprints scattered across the road. Hundreds of them. Tiny bare feet, some no longer than my palm. They hadn't been there earlier. They crisscrossed the entire street before disappearing toward the mine. None led away, only toward it. I knelt beside one. Water still filled the impression, cold enough that a thin layer of ice had begun forming around the edges. They passed there minutes ago. Eleanor whispered, "They want us to follow." I looked toward the mine entrance. The broken chain still hung across the opening, moving gently, although no wind reached that far into the cliff. As we approached, I noticed something carved into the stone above the entrance. The letters had almost disappeared beneath moss. I brushed them clean. Blackwater Silver Company. Below the name, someone had scratched another message much later. The cuts were deep, desperate. Seal it. The tunnel beyond swallowed our lantern light. Cold air flowed steadily outward, not stale air, fresh, as though the mountain itself were breathing. I lit a second lantern. Eleanor hesitated. "If you hear children?" "I know." "Don't answer." "No." "If they call your name?" "I won't." She looked relieved. Then she added one final warning. "If they sound like someone you love." My confidence faltered. "What?" "They have learned." The tunnel floor sloped gently downward. Old wooden support beams lined the passage, many cracked with age but still standing. Rusted mining carts rested where workers had abandoned them years earlier. Their wheels were frozen in place beneath layers of mineral deposits. The deeper we walked, the wetter the tunnel became. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling. Small streams crossed the tracks. The air smelled of damp earth and cold stone. Then, We found the first helmet. An old miner's helmet lay upside down beside the tracks. Its oil lamp still rested on the brim. Beside it, a skeleton, not scattered, not crushed. It sat against the wall exactly as though the man had chosen to rest there, his arms wrapped around his knees, his head bowed. I crouched beside him. No obvious injuries, no broken bones, nothing to explain his death except his fingers. The bones of both hands were worn smooth, as though he'd spent hours, days, scratching desperately at the stone wall beside him. My lantern revealed hundreds of tiny grooves carved into the rock, not words, not symbols, just endless scratch marks. The desperate work of someone trying to stay awake or stay alive. Eleanor wouldn't look at him. He was one of the night crews. You knew him? She nodded. He refused to leave the mine. Why? He said the children waited outside. Neither of us spoke again for several minutes. The tunnel curved sharply, then widened into a large underground chamber. The remains of an old excavation spread before us. Collapsed scaffolding, broken carts, abandoned tools. At the center stood a pool of perfectly still water, black, round, silent. My lantern reflected across its surface. No bottom could be seen. The map. I unfolded it again. The tunnel drawn by the unknown had ended here, at this pool, not the lake. This. A faint sound echoed through the chamber, a child humming very softly, not from behind us, not ahead, from beneath the water. Then another voice joined it, then another. The melody slowly filled the chamber. Eleanor grabbed my arm. We have to leave. Before I could answer, something pale drifted upward through the black water. At first I thought it was a piece of cloth. Then it turned. A small face. A little boy. His eyes were open, his lips curved into a gentle smile. He rose until his forehead touched the underside of the water's surface. Then another face appeared beside him. Then another. Then another. Dozens of children floated upward from the darkness below, not swimming, not moving, simply rising, watching us from beneath the water, and behind them, far deeper than the children, something enormous began moving in the darkness. It was part 2 of the Water Babies. Wait for part 3.